Thank you so much, Professor, for your acceptance of this invitation. I had a lovely meeting with Noam Chomsky yesterday. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is d.وليد Khalid. I completed my MA in TESOL in Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. I returned back to Iraq, so I'm from Baghdad. Now I'm working as a PhD researcher in applied linguistics in Babylon University. You have a big community, unimaginable big community of readers for your publications, especially the Stuff of Thought. It's a great book. And you're really an inspiration to big community of readers of your work in psychology and cognitive linguistics. I don't know how much time you have, but I'll take advantage of every second of your lovely time. I have a few questions here, but to admit, it's really challenging to talk to you.
Okay. Hope it's not too challenging.
I'll be biased to writing, and I'll start with this lovely comment that you left in one of your conferences. You said, this quote, you mentioned that bad writing is a deliberate choice.
I tend to think it's not a deliberate choice. That although that is a common accusation, the question is, why is academic writing so bad? And a common answer is it's academics deliberately try to write in obscure language, so to show off how erudite, how learned, how wise they are, how sophisticated their subject is. So they're trying to fool their audiences into thinking that there's a lot more complexity and abstractness than there really is. They're hiding the fact they have nothing to say. I actually don't believe that theory, because I just know too many scientists and scholars and linguists who definitely have something to say. They don't want to they're not trying to impress the audience, but just writing is difficult. It's a skill. And unless you think when you're writing, both what are the ideas that I want to get down, and how good is the prose, how good are the sentences, how good is the composition, unless you make that effort, it's going to be terrible, because you're going to be assuming that your audience knows what you know, the problem of egocentrism or failure to mind read, or the curse of knowledge, namely when you know something, it's hard to imagine what it's like for someone else who doesn't know it. And if you don't take that effort into making your language clear, it won't be clear. So there has to be a choice to write well. I don't think people make the choice to write badly, at least most people.
Okay, well, I'm going through the list of questions that I've prepared here for you, and I would love if you elaborate more on how. I'm not going to go over the questions in order, so there's no chronological order for the questions. And I'm very interested to hear your detailed insights on this question particularly. How is cognitive linguistics contributing to modern language learning, especially in L2 context? We have in Iraq big community of L2 learners who lack stimuli to learn language. English is not the second spoken language in this community. In the Iraqi society particularly, we have so many ethnicities here, and they speak derivations of Arabic and Assyrian and Kurdish. But English has become part of the new generation trend to either show off or boast that you know a little bit of English, that you can communicate with other cultures. And this trend is being escalating recently. So I would love to hear your insights on how cognitive linguistics is contributing to expediting the process of language learning in modern life.
Well, indeed, English is becoming a de facto world language. No one decided that it would. No one thought this was a good idea. It's just happening largely because of the influence of the United States in technology and in entertainment. There was a dream that we would have Esperanto as the universal second language. There are enthusiasts for Esperanto, but since it isn't it isn't tied to a community. It's not a language that children learn as their first language. It is not as expressive and as embedded in a global culture as it turned out English ended up being. But in terms of cognitive linguistics, there are a number of contributors. One of them is that language is used in a social context. It's used to communicate. It's also used to project our sense of self, who we are, how we relate to the person we're dealing with. And I have found that unless you are called on to use a language in conversation, then it's very difficult the first time you have to do it. If you learn from textbooks, if you learn from online courses, because when you're speaking to someone else, you don't just so much care about English syntax, English vocabulary, you also care about what relationship you have with that person. You don't want to seem like an idiot. You don't want to be arrogant and force them to speak in your language. You don't want to be rude. And so a lot of language competence consists in the reflexes of politeness, of what linguists call pragmatics, namely the use of language in a conversational context. Without that, then you might be able to write papers in English or some other foreign language, but you will have a lot of difficulty carrying on a conversation.
To what extent do you think that L2 learners and teachers of English, especially like me, which I find really challenging actually to teach writing, since I'm not a native speaker of English. I pursued my MA in language teaching. However, I still have this obstacle of teaching writing specifically in L2 context, because some people say, and I'll quote for Fox News style, some people say that
people are saying, a lot of people are saying,
yeah, some people say that non-native speakers cannot teach writing. Do you agree or disagree on that? And what are your recommendations to L2 teachers of English in terms of writing?
Yeah, I don't agree. And in fact, sometimes L2, I have found in my correspondence, including people from the Middle East, that often the questions that they ask me about English vocabulary, English grammar are very subtle. They're sometimes hard to answer, precisely because they have to think about them. It isn't completely natural. It isn't unconscious. And as I mentioned in our first exchange, often good writing comes only from consciously thinking about how to be clear. If it's too easy, and if you just dump what's on your mind, then other people aren't going to be able to figure out what was on your mind. But if you think, okay, I have to get my ideas across, I want my readers to understand them, I'm going to use the medium of English sentences to do it, what should go into those sentences, that kind of self-consciousness can sometimes lead to clearer writing.
Now, well, I'm a non-native speaker of English, and I keep saying and reiterating that, particularly because I want to emphasize that identity. I'm proud of being a non-native speaker who speaks English. I can write essays, but they are not 100% perfect. But do you think when we become cognizant or conscious about what we are writing, we are going to complicate the lexical level of writing or simplify it? I remember the quote that you made about the cutaneous rabbit tapping here.
Yes. Yes, it was an article in a scientific journal in my field, and I didn't know what they were talking about because they use shorthand, and that is a sin of academics, not just academics. That's why legalese is so hard to read, the writing of lawyers, bureaucratese, corporatese, any specialty. The people inside the specialty forget that new babies are being born every day. They aren't born knowing the jargon of your specialty. You have to explain things with examples, with concrete images. Ironically, for someone who studies language, I sometimes think that language is overrated as a way of understanding the world. Ultimately, we have to be able to see in our mind's eye what the writer is seeing. And a good mental model of writing is the writer should think, I've seen something, I want my reader to see it. How do I allow my reader to see what I'm seeing? And unless the reader can form an image in their minds, and you talked about the cutaneous rabbit illusion, which is, it means nothing unless you know what it is. What it really consists of is if you close your eyes and someone has a few taps on the wrist, few taps on the elbow, few taps on the shoulder, it feels like a set of taps running up your arm. Now, why don't you just say that? If you just explain what it is, taps on the arm, not cutaneous illusion, then people can visualize what it refers to. And that's what comprehension consists of. It isn't just the writer uses a bunch of words, blah, 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 and the reader hears the bunch of words, blah, 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 blah. The point of the words is so that the reader can see something in the world that the writer has seen.
Well, we've been dictated since I was a child that the more you use formal expressions, the higher perception of you as an English writer will be. I remember this quote from Steve Jobs when he said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. I don't know if it is associated to Steve Jobs or somebody else, but sometimes people interpret the simplicity of lexical items that we choose as weakness of our writing. What is your comment on this, Professor?
I think that the overuse of jargon and unnecessary technical terms is a sign of weakness, is a sign of laziness. Often, I agree with Steve Jobs, it requires a lot of thought, of intelligence, of planning, of sophistication to write clear, simple prose. That is very much true. It's very easy to just cough up all of the jargon terms that you've been using with your colleagues and you just read in a book, but to mentally translate from all of those jargon terms to what they actually refer to. What's actually going on? Are you tapping someone on the arm? Instead of talking about stimuli, if you talk about, the Muppet dolls, if instead of talking about a program or an intervention, you say, we put up a sign with a frowning face, so that people know what you do. That often takes work because it's easy to forget what your own professional jargon is referring to. It's hard work to think, oh, wait, I know this, but do my readers know this? Putting yourself in the mind of the readers is what leads to clear prose.
Some people draw a dichotomy between reading and writing, and they teach them separately. To what extent do you think that these two skills are complementing to each other or independent of each other when it comes to mastering and improving the writing style or prose that you have in this perspective particularly?
I think they're very much connected. And when I wrote my own writing manual, I had to confess on the first page that even though I wrote the manual because I hoped it would help people become better writers, when I asked people who I know are good writers, what manuals did you read? What's the competition? They said, oh, I didn't read any style manuals. I thought, so you really don't need what I am now writing to become a good writer. How did they become a good writer? The answer is the same in every case. They did a lot of reading.
Okay, so it's not. Is it coming from experiential learning and walking in the field and getting in touch with people and culture, or is it more of reading particular books and manuals?
So since I've written a manual, I like to think it's reading a manual, but and I hope it helps. But
I'll take everything you say for granted.
Yes, but it can't be the only thing. Because even when I was writing my manual, I didn't want it to make it 1,000 pages. So I chose what I wanted to emphasize. And as I was writing, I thought, gee, I really should also talk about this. I should talk about that. I should give this advice. I should give that advice. There's just so much to mastering writing. You can't lay it all down in a set of steps. But when you are a reader, when you consume a lot of good writing, then those millions and millions of words leave an impression in the brain, and you get a feel for what's natural in English, what's unnatural, what are the little idioms and figures of speech and jokes that English speakers use to kind of liven up their prose. But it isn't just experiential, because you also have to apply some thought to it, especially if you're learning a foreign language as an adult. Unlike children who really do have an advantage in picking up a language, with an adult, especially if you want to become not just a competent writer, but a good writer, you have to think, oh, I really like that paragraph. This is a really good writer that I'm reading. But what did they do right? Why am I enjoying this sentence so much? And you have to reverse engineer or diagnose what goes into good writing, so that when it's your turn to write, you know what those tricks are.
Okay. Well, on the same train of thought, since we are talking about the manuals of writing, I have a cheat sheet of one of the questions here. And which one is the most endearing book out of the collection of books that you have that is really endearing to you and you recommend readers? And I'll take it for granted from you that this is the book that I will read and recommend my fellow students and friends to read.
Are you talking now about particularly writing manuals?
Yes.
Well, the classic writing manual, the one that everyone begins with, is The Elements of Style by E.B. White and William Strunk. Strunk and White. Yeah. It's been around for 80 years. It was written, the first draft was written more than 100 years ago. Yeah. It's got a lot of problems. There's a lot of, there's a few bits of bad advice in it, but on the whole, it's a very good place to start. Okay. So if you're talking about writing manuals, you have to start with Strunk and White. Some linguists have criticized it. My friend Geoffrey Pullum, the famous linguist at Edinburgh, thinks it's toxic, it's terrible. I disagree with Jeff. I agree with him. It has problems, but it's a very good place to start.
That's exactly what Professor Noam Chomsky said yesterday in the interview. I'll link the interview in the next email that I'll send to you. He talks about how you can immerse yourself in reading in order to improve your writing and improve understanding, your understanding of cultures. So
can I actually add one more bit of advice there? Yes. This is another classic. This isn't a book, it's an essay, it's a famous essay. George Orwell's Politics and the English Language.
Oh my God, that's
everyone has to read that. That's got problems too. A lot of the things that it says are wrong, but still you have to read it if you want to become a good
still
writer.
Valid here.
Yes.
So you think that non-native speakers of English can excel in writing? If yes, why?
Yeah, and there are famous examples. Two of the best writers of the English language did not speak it as a native language: Vladimir Nabokov and Joseph Conrad.
Conrad, yeah.
And Nabokov.
So you think that, Professor, you think that non-native speakers can excel in writing and they can publish and they can improve their writing to an extent or equivalent level to native speakers?
I think it requires more effort, it requires more work. And my own study with Joshua Hartshorn and Joshua Tenenbaum, which we published about 4 years ago in the journal Cognition, shows that there really is an advantage if you begin learning a language before the age of about 17. After 17, there starts to be a decline. But still, the fact that you can't reach 100% of the proficiency of a child doesn't mean that you can't be very, very high, especially with lots of reading experience.
Great. So, Professor, I don't want to take much of your time. I know that you have this precious time for you to relax and have coffee probably in the afternoon and and the lovely, are you in California right now, right?
Right now I'm in Berkeley, California. That's right.
Okay, I love it. I miss it so much. I stayed there for 3 years during my MA degree studies. I was in Monterey, south of San Francisco, south of San Jose. Based on your extensive research in psychology, and I promise this is my last question, based on your extensive study in psychology and research in psychology and cognitive linguistics, what are the ultimate kind of advice that you give to L2 learners of English in order to speed up their learning process of English, specifically tapping on the findings in cognitive linguistics?
I would give two pieces of advice, and they connect to our conversation. One of them is be sure that you actually use it in conversation, that you have other speakers that you develop your skills with. It can't just be from books. The second is to find examples of English or whatever language you're learning you really enjoy, that are funny, that are clear, that are interesting, so that the content will keep you going. So it's not just an exercise, but you want to understand it in order to understand the content.
Professor, thank you so much for this lovely meeting. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for this precious time that you've given us with this insightful list of comments and recommendations. We really appreciate your effort. You're such a hero. You are one of the biggest, actually, professors that we look up to when it comes to cognitive linguistics, especially in our studies, University of Babylon, University of Baghdad. We thank you on behalf of our universities here, and we really appreciate you for the amount of great work that you're doing.
That's very kind of you, Waleed. Thank you very much for having me on. I wish you great success in your studies in this series. And I wish success and satisfaction to all the people who are watching this interview.
I really appreciate it, Professor. Thank you so much, and have a lovely day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.